Welcome back to the All Figured Out podcast. I'm Andrea Barr. Thanks for joining me again this week. I had such a good conversation with a friend of mine, Joanna Brewster. I can't believe some of these people that I have met in my career and know who are just such geniuses in their craft. Joanna Brewster is one of those. So today's episode is part emotional intelligence masterclass, part therapy session. And I mean that in the best way. I sat down with Joanna Brewster, who is a leadership and emotional intelligence coach. And I used myself as a bit of a guinea pig to unpack what's really underneath some of those moments of irritability, frustration, and overwhelm that so many of us feel, especially as parents. We also talked about how Joanna bravely rebuilt her life and career after a major accident and the decision to end her marriage when she realized that she had really lost herself in the process throughout her career and her life of becoming a mother and being a wife. This is Emotional Intelligence 101, but with really practical examples and through storytelling. And it really is a story of how you can reclaim your voice, reclaim your purpose, and most importantly, your power. So without further ado, Joanna Brewster. Joanna Brewster, thank you so much for coming on the All Figured Out podcast. It's such a pleasure to finally have you here.
Yeah, thanks for welcoming me, Andrea. I'm excited for this conversation and just to dive into the discussion with you.
Yay. Okay, there's like I always say, there's so much to get into, so many places and spaces, and I'm always seek solace in the fact that this doesn't have to be a one and done. So I'm not going to try to fit everything into one because you're such a multifaceted person. You've such an interesting story and a story that I actually don't know too much about, and our listeners probably don't know anything about it. So for those who don't know you, and for myself as well, I would love for you to take us back. I know you shared in some prep for this recording, you said, I kind of got to a point in my life where I thought I was happy. And I have a feeling there's a story around that. You said there was career pivots, and maybe you realized it wasn't the case, that you weren't living out your purpose. So take us back to that journey of getting to that point where you realized this, maybe I am not happy.
Happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of it was a realization of I'm not happy. And then part of it was sort of a forced choice, I guess. So I'll go back kind of to the beginning and probably beginning with I had started working for the federal government and it was 1999. Shortly after I had gotten married. And my family thought I had landed my dream job, federal government, pension, benefits, flexible schedule, because you could work, longer shift and then have a flex day. Every couple weeks, you'd get a day off. And I enjoyed the job at the beginning. It was a lot of interesting learning and learning new skills and working with customers. And I really found satisfaction in that. But I looked around and saw a lot of unhappy people and thought, this is not what I'm meant to do. And so what I had always really been interested in and wanted to do was far more creative. And it was fashion design. And I talked to my husband at the time and said, I can't see myself in this career forever. And I really want to go back to school and pursue fashion design. And so we talked about that and agreed that I could do it part-time in the evening. And so I went back to school and ended up doing really well and got a job while I was still in school in the design industry. And fast forward, I was working for a company that was kind of a competitor to Lululemon, and I was got pregnant with my daughter, and was going to go back and realized that things weren't really running the way they had been before I left. And now having a family, thinking about that future, I just thought maybe I need something a little bit more stable. Maybe I, need to make another pivot. And I went into a career in marketing, and I was very happy in that job. It blended sort of my business analytical side and it blended my creative side. And I grew my position from just a junior marketing assistant to their marketing manager. And when I left on maternity leave, I was planning to come back and continue my career there and grow my team. I was excited. And I was in a car accident when I was 8 months pregnant with my son, a month before I went on my maternity leave. So when I say kind of a forced choice, that was the forced choice. I was going to multiple therapies and treatments, and it came to the time for me to go back to work. And most of my doctors and specialists and therapists were saying, you're not going to be able to return to a full time job.
Wow.
So that was a real shock and change in my identity of sort of, okay, what's next? What do I do now? Because I don't want to not work. And the gift was that I got to be home with my kids and I got to be around for all of their, school performances and activities and drop offs and pickup. But I knew there was still a purpose that was in me that I wanted to fulfill. And so I began volunteering and I did a lot of volunteer work in their school. And that's sort of what led me to where I am now. That's how I got on that journey.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can't even imagine. I mean, I can't imagine that 8 months pregnant, getting in a car accident. That must have been so incredibly scary. And you were just saying before we hit record that you were at a soccer tournament for your son. So he was, both of
Yeah.
you were little resilient things, making it through and coming out thriving, it sounds like. So, I mean, kudos to you. And that's so scary. And so, how did that feel? Like that moment of being told you can't return back to work. Did you agree with them in the moment?
In some ways I did. And it was because I thought if I go back to work and I don't have time to do these physical therapies and treatments that I'm doing to take care of my pain and my body, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do a good job. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to the expectations and of not only the company, but of myself. I knew what I was capable of before, and I was just worried that I wouldn't be doing as good a job. So in a way, I agreed. I didn't want to ever take that as a label of I can't work or I can't do something. And I was working, supporting my ex-husband with the landscaping company that we had started as well. And so I was busy. And I guess what I quickly realized was that the stress of juggling that work and parenting and rehabilitation was not helping me get better.
Hmm.
And so the question was, what does work look like for me? What will a career look like for me? And it took some time to figure that out.
How did you figure that out? That's a huge decision to make when you've already pivoted a few times. And so you knew you were capable of a pivot. And
Hmm.
on top of that, you have this layer of like you said, you didn't want to be labeled as you can't work, but work in the context of how you'd work would look different.
Right.
You have children,
Yeah.
you're taking care of yourself, which I think is the bravest, coolest realization that you made early on in that journey and saying, I need to take care of myself to take care of the little humans. So, how on earth did you rediscover that purpose? I know you said volunteering. What else? And now you are fully thriving as a working individual and entrepreneur. So, how did you do that?
Yeah. It's a very dear to my heart story. I was volunteering in schools teaching a positive body image program, and it's called Free to Be. And I loved it. And the students were engaged and interested. And I noticed that there were a lot of boys coming up and asking me questions after the classes. And I thought, there are so many programs out there for girls. And obviously having a daughter, I had my daughter in a bunch of programs. And I thought, what is there for boys? And so I was doing some research to see, what are the kinds of programs out there for boys that are maybe developing their emotional intelligence, developing their leadership, developing their self worth and their confidence outside of sports.
Mm.
And I didn't find much. And as I was doing this research, it was one day that my son, about 9 or 10 years old at the time, walked up behind me and said, "Mom, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing some research for maybe, a business that I could start and what I could do as a new career." And he very confidently said, "Well, I know what you should do." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "You need to have feeling talks with people." And I thought, wow, what are feeling talks? So I said, tell me, what is that? What does that look like? And he laid it all out in a structured format. And he said, first you do this, then you do this, then you ask this, then you ask this. And that's a feeling talk. And I was like, wow, that is coaching. And that's emotional intelligence. And that's kind of what we do at bedtime. So I'm already doing it. And I thought, that's incredible. And so I looked up emotional intelligence training programs. I found a coaching certification. And probably within a few months, I was on my way to Arizona to do my first emotional intelligence certification. And that was at the very beginning of 2020, right before everything shut down, last in-person training.
Come on, Joanna. Are you
Yeah,
kidding me?
yeah,
So isn't there something to be said about when something's right and there's this flow around it, things can just happen pretty quickly? Like, people
yes,
ask me sometimes, they're like, "Okay, if I work with you and I wanna change, pivot jobs or whatever, what's the runway we're looking at?" It's obviously the hard and they're like, "I know, you can't guarantee." And they're like, "But give or take." I'm like, "It could be, I mean, a month to 6 months, 8 months, whatever." Like, it's hard to say, but there's something like my answer should be something like when it's right and when there's this power and energy behind it, like things can happen in weird, very mysterious, unexplained ways. Like, oh, you just happen to find this training program that happens to be in a couple months' time. It's like that doesn't
yeah,
just happen. These programs happen once a year, twice a year, whatever. So that's
right.
so incredibly cool. I have to ask, what were you doing at bedtime? For all the parents listening, what can we do at bedtime to have our children then say,
Yeah.
uh, these feeling talks? I mean, give it to me. I want to start this.
Well, first I must say, much harder with a teenager.
Okay. Okay.
But
Okay. Not there yet. Over here, not
yeah,
there. Yeah.
but, w young, it just felt very natural, like, it was always that bedtime talk of how was your day at school, what happened on the playground today, or who did you play with, and what did you learn, and there something would come out about something that happened in the classroom, and usually he would offer up a feeling, but if not, I would say, "Well, how did you feel about that?" And throughout that conversation, we would pull out a bunch of different feelings that had happened during the day. And sometimes there was feelings around, bedtime and going to bed. And so I'd usually end up like throughout the conversation, okay, so we have, Mr. Angry from the incident on the playground, and we have Mr. Frustrated from, not getting attention from the teacher when you had a question to ask, or Mr. Tired after school because you needed a snack. And right now we have Mr. Hungry and can't go to sleep and feeling anxious. And so we'd have this handful of feelings. And I would say, okay, what do you need to say to Mr. Angry to be able to go to bed? And what do we need to finish with, Mr. Frustrated? And we would kind of problem solve through those conversations. And I didn't realize at the time that I was asking him a lot of questions and helping him sort of figure out what the answer was, that he could go back to school the next day and try something different. And so, him breaking that down for me, really laying out that structure was like, oh, okay.
Mm.
um, yeah.
And did that work? Do you think that this works with, different personalities? Like, did this work with your daughter, that type of approach?
We had a little bit of a different approach. Often there was conversations around the day at bedtime, but often it was, that anxiety or trouble going to sleep. And she wasn't as much of a bedtime story
Mm.
uh, fan. My son loved the bedtime stories and reading books, but she didn't like that as much. Her, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like her secret sauce or what she loved was imagination. And like we would create a dream ahead of going to sleep. So it
Oh,
would be, what do you want to experience in dreamland tonight? And she'd say, well, I'd want to go ice skating. Okay, well, who do you want to come with you? And what does it look like? Like, is there any colors or any, fun decorations? And we'd sort of like plan it all out. And then she would feel calm enough to go to sleep with that vision and visual in her head. So,
that is so cool. That totally plays to the different, um, like, almost love languages or but no, I don't know what this is. Maybe this is emotional intelligence, but tools, tactics, right? Some people are
yeah,
verbal, but for
yeah,
her, she's maybe more visual. Maybe she's, like, more creative in her mind and needs to kinda create these worlds and to calm and soothe the mind versus some people, it's just the talking isn't their thing. I when I'm coaching
yeah,
people, you probably do the same. Especially I do these 4-hour sessions to start out. It's a long day, but I can very quickly I do a personality assessment. I can very quickly gauge, their rhythms and how they work. And so some people, they're doing self-study for half of it. And I'm getting them to
yeah,
think and reflect and draw pictures and be tactile with sticky notes. And some people, they want to talk the 4 hours, which is incredible because they verbally process.
right.
And hey, this is foreshadowing into what we're gonna be talking about too with emotional intelligence, I imagine, where you just have to read the situation, and it
Yeah.
sounds like you did that so well as a parent.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, and as you mentioned that, maybe those are some of the skills or competencies. When we look at the different profiles or assessment tools that I use, there are different like brain talents. And for her, imagination was a strong one. And so, yeah, you're right. Like utilizing or listening for those different strengths or ways that maybe people communicate, like love languages, is definitely something that those tools can show you, right? What your strengths
Mhm.
are, but then you can also use them for relationships and how you communicate with people.
I'm curious from your perspective, given the rapid nature of information at our fingertips, now even quicker with ChatGPT, which I think is a fantastic tool. I think all these things are amazing and beautiful if and when used appropriately. And given the information overload, especially as parents, are you noticing or do you believe that there might be a bit of a shift away from that sense of intuition? Like I know that something like emotional intelligence is so intuition driven. There's physical cues in the world, but a lot of it is really reading these subtleties that you can't quite
Mhm.
put your finger on. What are your feelings about that and about the information versus, just noticing what your child might be craving versus going and seeing what Dr. Becky says?
Mhm. Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, what comes to mind for me is that with technology, with the way that they communicate and connect with one another when it's through this screen versus the face to face, we're losing a lot of information. We're losing a lot of data. And that can't be replicated by technology, right? Like facial cues, smiles, even just physical energy, those can't
Mhm.
be replicated. So we're missing a lot of that information and we're seeing such an increase in anxiety. And I think a lot of younger people are having trouble naming what they're actually feeling. They don't really know anymore. And there's also maybe a numbness to what that is, because we're exposed to so much information that maybe we're not as in tune with what we're
Mhm.
actually really feeling. So I think there's space to really start building emotional literacy, giving people tools to help name what they're feeling. Most of us really use maybe 5 feeling words, and there's more than 1,000 feeling words.
Oh, cool.
And I think, really if we were to write them all down, probably most of us can't write down more than 50.
No
So,
way. Yeah.
to really find the nuance in what we're feeling, if we say, "Oh, I'm angry." Well, are you angry? Are you annoyed? Are you mad? How intense is it?
Mhm.
And once we can kind of figure out that information, that gives us more data to be able to make decisions, to be able to blend that with our thinking uh, towards the outcomes that we really want.
Mhm. And I feel like there's gotta be something to be said about understanding your definitions for things. I'm always kind of I don't know, I have this thing with words where I think words are so important and the words you use are really important, can really impact other people. And at the same time, words have so much nuance. Like a word to me and a word to you, the same word can have such different meaning. And
Yeah.
I think it is important to really think about that word angry. Angry to me and my threshold for anger, it's like pain is very different. You've spent time in hospitals with family member recently. I've spent a bit of time in hospitals and,
Right.
hear that scale, the pain scale. And at first you're like, this is such a ridiculous question because like, how do you even, they're like, the worst pain you've ever felt is a 10, the least is this. But what I started to realize is they would, when my husband was in the hospital, they start to gauge what your threshold is. So the word pain to my husband, they started to recognize, okay, an 8 for him is really bad, but maybe
Mhm.
someone else is using an 8 as just like, I'm in a bit of pain. So, anyways, all that to say, I feel like there's, using the words or even there if it's just in your journal or just thinking about the word, engaging, okay, if I feel anger, what is the threshold? Like, what is the level? And it's
Mhm.
the level where, when you're prepping to have a baby and they're like, there's a difference between pain and suffering. Like, what is maybe you
Yeah.
can handle those feelings of anger internally I if they're a simmer, but, is a 4 like, okay, this is moving into suffering. Like, this anger is
Right.
creating suffering within me or
Yeah.
within others around me. Am I getting this kind of ish accurately in terms of
Yeah. So, like, a
the
more
naming?
intense level of anger would be rage.
Okay, right.
So, if you
Oh,
look
yeah, yeah, yeah.
at Plutchik's wheel of emotions, you can see different intensities of our core basic emotions. And so it's fun to play with because they have different messages. Like the message of anger is something is blocked, something's in my way. That's the message it's trying to tell us. And when we know that, then we can make a choice. So, what do we want to do with that? What do we want to do with that anger? And how can we use that anger as fuel? How can we channel it in a healthy way? So we use a tool called VET, which is validate, explore, transform. So when you validate that feeling, that immediately drops the intensity. When you name it and you validate that that's what you're feeling, immediately the intensity goes down. And then we can explore, well, why is that coming up? What's blocked? What's in my way? And then transform that into something that we can use to move forward and motivate us. So when we look at the 6 seconds change map, for example, the feelings on the inside of change are often fear, frustration, and judgment. And what we want to do is try to shift those to the outside to support us through that transition and change. We want to move that fear to courage or that frustration to excitement or that judgment to curiosity. And that can really support us in making a change.
Oh my gosh, you just said so much in like 90 seconds, maybe not even. You're such a wealth of knowledge. You came and spoke at the Formula Fig event that I hosted in West Vancouver here. And all three of my panelists were so incredible. And I had probably every single person afterwards come up and say, where did you find these people?
That
You
was
what
so much fun. That was a
you're
really great
like,
event.
holy smokes, I couldn't have felt more I felt like this I knew you guys would be great, but I was sitting there being like, "Oh my god, who am I even up here?" Like, I was asking questions, like, "This is ridiculous." Anyways, oh my goodness, okay, we gotta break this down. We gotta break this down.
Okay.
Can we use an example? And can we use a
Yeah.
very, very common parenting example of
Yeah.
irritability? End of the
Yeah.
day, 5:30 PM, you're so tired, you're trying to get dinner on the table, and at the exact same time, you're feeling irritable because you don't wanna be getting dinner on the table, and you just wanna be on the couch with your kids snuggling and watching their show with them, and your Apple Watch is going off with work messages that in an annoying way. So there's that irritability, frustration, whatever.
Right.
How okay, ho you did an example too at the formula figure event, and it was so cool. So let's use that. That's a real example for me. That's a real example for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you move through that?
Well, so let's start with the irritability. And is there, what other feelings would you
Mm.
name in that irritability?
FOMO, but if fear of missing out, like I'm missing out.
Mm,
I now get to be with my kids, but I'm not actually with them. They're on the couch in front of me watching TV, and I'm actually physically disconnected from them because I'm cooking the
mm,
tacos.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So what is that? That's like I feel disconnected maybe. Or
Yeah.
is that a
Yeah.
feeling? That sounds
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Disconnected.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what what is happening for you when you feel that irritability and disconnection? What
Mm,
what thoughts are coming up and what are you doing?
okay. You want the real real?
Yeah.
You want
Yeah.
the real real,
The real
Joanna?
real.
The real
Yeah.
real. Okay. I start counting in my head to make sure that the parenting load is 50-50. That's my truth. I start reevaluating how we split everything because I do food prep, shopping for the food. My husband does a whole whack of other stuff, like a lot. Um, Laundry being one of them, which is a huge thing in our house. There's so much laundry. But that's where I go. And especially certain times of the month when the irritability has gone up, I
Mhm.
start I start counting. I'll call it counting, checking for
Okay.
fairness.
Okay. So would the thought be, is this fair?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I'm doing more?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's kind of in
Yeah.
judgment. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then what is the action that often follows because of those feelings of irritability and disconnection and the thoughts that are happening?
You're like watching me as I'm starting to just break break down in a smile and like recoiling, but I'm going for it. And I would to have this conversation with Scotty too. So
Yeah.
it's fair game. Scotty, well, the way that we set up our rhythms is I work out in the mornings, I wake up early, and it works perfectly for me. I between 4:45, 5:30, I'm cooking dinner, doing lunches, whatever for the next day. My husband, Scotty, is downstairs working out. That's his time to work out. This is the rhythm. So he's done his workout. He's coming up. He jumps in the kitchen. He's unloading the dishwasher. He's cleaning up after me as I'm cooking. Like these are all lovely things.
Right.
What's really happening is I've just been counting in my head. I'm feeling disconnected from my kids. Oh, this is such a good therapy session, Joanna. This is just what this podcast episode's going to be. And then he's unloading the dishwasher, which is right in front of the stove.
Okay. So
I'm at the
in your way.
stove. He's in my way. So I've already been counting. Then he comes in, he's helping. But in my head, I'm like, you're in my way. And this is my job is the food. And now I can't get the food cooked because you're trying to be helpful. And I don't want to stop you from doing this.
Right.
Discourage this.
Right.
Oh my God, am I nuts?
Yeah. No, so human and so common. I know that feeling well. I've often thought, yeah, you're in my way right now, but you're being so helpful. So
Well, and I'm not even blaming the house. I'm not like, really, I should be thinking, why the hell would they put the dishwasher right in front of the stove? Like, that's a weird place. Anyways, no, I'm blaming him. I'm not
right.
blaming the house, I'm blaming him.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got the feelings of irritability, disconnection, now a bit more irritability with you're in my way. The thoughts of this isn't fair and you're counting, kind of measuring,
Yes.
checking that out.
Yes.
And then what are you doing? Like, what is the
Mm.
action that happens?
I'm going quiet. So instead of just
Okay.
idly chit-chatting, "Oh, how's your day?" It's a moment where we could actually be connecting because
Right.
we're both side by side, we're puttering,
Yeah.
doing, mindless tasks. I go quiet And maybe he asks me a question, I kinda just answer, but I'm not connecting.
Okay, so you're
I never noticed
shutting
any.
down a little
Yes.
bit?
Yeah.
Okay,
I didn't notice
okay.
any of this was happening. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'm shutting down. I'm shutting down.
Okay. So if we frame that as a pattern, right? If
Mhm.
this is something that happens frequently in the kitchen at dinner time, it would be a when I then I statement. So when I feel irritable, irritated, disconnected, I and then it could either be think this or do this. So it could be I think this or I shut
Shut down.
down.
Yep.
So thinking about all three of those, the feelings, the thoughts, and the actions, if you could change one,
Hmm.
which one would you start with?
Well, my rational brain perhaps says, why don't I go to the root cause
Mm,
of the disconnect and just kinda nip it in the bud?
okay.
Because what
So
if I
what would that,
reframed? Yeah.
yeah, what would that look like?
Well, this is my kids love watching TV for the 30 minutes they get to watch TV while I'm making dinner. And to be honest, if I put on a little podcast or something and I'm 10, 5 feet away from them, why can't that be a nice moment for them to enjoy, them to just relax? Like, I do believe I know some people have feelings about screen time. My kids aren't negatively affected by it if they watch 30 minutes in the week on a weeknight or
Right, right.
and they love it, and they're
Yeah,
cuddling on the couch together, and what if I could take that time to have a moment to do what I love, which is listening to podcasts,
yeah,
instead of seeing it as a disconnect?
yeah. So when you do that reframe, what
Yeah.
are the feelings that you experience when you think about that?
Well, it really does kind of cascade. I'm like, then I wouldn't feel the disconnect. I wouldn't start counting because 'cause I'd be like, "What a gift it is to have this time to listen to my podcasts." A
Yeah.
plug for All Figured Out. You could be listening to All Figured Out while you're And then it's like I show up as a better person. Scotty comes in. If he's in my way, I could make a joke, be like, "Yo, get out of my way." He'd get out of my way,
Yeah, make it playful.
or be like, "Hey, let me just finish cooking and then you can tackle that. Thanks for doing that."
Yeah, yeah,
How much better is that?
yeah.
So that's emotional intelligence, or sorry, is there any
Yes.
do we have to keep going? No, that's it, right?
That
That's
it if you can identify the pattern that is happening, whether you begin with the feelings or the thoughts or the action that's happening, now you have a choice to change it. And so you reframed it, but somebody might start by saying, okay, well, I don't want to think that the workload isn't fair. So I'm going to choose the thought that I'm grateful that we have this agreement and that we've split the workload.
mm,
So they would identify a new thought to have. And when you identify that new thought, what are the feelings that that brings up? And, I saw in your face, like it looked like more joy and, happy that the kids are having their moment and that now you get a chance to listen to your podcast. And so the feelings shift. And then the action shifts. So if you can identify which one can you shift the most easily, it's a cascade. They're all going to shift.
that's like magic, Joanna.
And it takes time, right?
Yeah.
It's laying a new neural pathway for a new pattern. And so what happens is that our pathway has been laid for that original pattern. So probably even before he comes in the kitchen, it's well down that pathway, right? I know I've been there.
It's forged. It has been forged.
Yeah. And our brains do that
Yeah.
because we like efficiency.
Yes.
And so it chooses that one.
Yeah.
And we have to tell it to lay a new one, walk through those weeds and cut that grass down, lay that new pathway and walk that one. And the more we do that, the easier it becomes.
That's why I think things like coaching and therapy counseling are so important because I find it's like this sandbox where you can do these little exercises or these practices and get everything out verbally to hear it yourself in a very, I don't know, very, what's the word? A place that's safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can imagine that does, like, I can't quite remember what we just did, and so it would take me a couple, like, I'll listen back to this and be like, "Okay, right, so what was the feeling? What was the trigger or the feeling?" It does take a minute. Now
Mhm.
you have some resources, we'll make a blog post and we can put this process in there as, in
Yeah.
notes so that people can kinda come back to this. Because I feel like it would take a bit of practice to try to just flow through that, especially these gorges we've created in our minds, these neural pathways that are so
Right.
formed. Probably was formed, but we used to do dishes in my house, the kids, and, like, oh my gosh, we'd be kicking each other, whipping each other with towels, like, it was a lot more aggressive back then, but I could
Yeah.
I could see where this all came from. We oh my gosh, I don't even know how we got to this already, but is emotional this is the work of emotional intelligence. When you said emotional intelligence, is that what we just did?
Yes, it's the practice. It's a daily practice, and it's not something that we're going to arrive at a point where, oh, I am emotionally intelligent and I have no more work to do.
Mm.
It is a daily practice, and it's tuning into what we're feeling. It's being able to name that. It's being able to be self aware enough to start to explore and recognize what our patterns are. And then it's being able to find those choices. And the other part of it is the self direction piece, which really ties to our values. So when we can connect with what our values are, that can really support us in our choices. So your value might be that time with your kids, so family. So how can you align what you're doing in the kitchen to that value and be modeling for them also? What you want them to see. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I recognized I didn't want my kids to see me so irritated and angry all the time. I wanted them to see me. Those are natural feelings, and obviously we're going to have them. And it's, yes, like by all means, show those feelings, but then show how you deal with them
Mm.
and how you navigate them. And make that choice to kind of transform that. And so even being able to say, I'm really irritated right now, and I don't want to get to the place where I disconnect from everybody and shut down. So can you all help me right now? And figure out what that looks like for you as a family or for you as a couple.
Can you all help me by not being so irritating? I'm kidding, I'm kidding. You're like, no, you're completely missing the point." How would you define so when we because we hear emotional intelligence a lot. It's
Mhm.
become very pop psychology, like, it's become very much like a term people throw around, but if you were to kinda give it your own little definition, doesn't have to be anything eloquent, but
Mm.
what is it? What is it?
Yeah, so my quick definition of it would be, being aware of your own and others' feelings, using that information to blend with your thinking to make choices for optimal outcomes.
Cool.
And I think what we forget is that first, as humans, we're emotional creatures that think. We're not thinking creatures that feel. And we've been so taught and programmed to not feel, not feel, not feel. Don't bring those feelings into the workplace. Don't talk about how you feel. That
Mm.
shows weakness. That we start to lose that data and that information, and we become very reactive. And when we're able to take that data of our feelings and use that, we have that choice to become responsive. And so we can take that moment to pause. And this is another thing I'll share. So, what happens when we react is it's our amygdala getting hijacked, right? That emotion is kicking open our brain. So, if this is I don't know if everybody will be able to see this, but if we hold up our hand and our thumb is our amygdala, and that tucks into the inside of our palm,
'Kay.
and then we close the fingers over top, that's our prefrontal cortex.
Mm.
Well, when our amygdala gets hijacked and it kicks open our prefrontal cortex, we're not using our thinking brain anymore. So by being able to take a pause, we're able to bring that back online. We're able to use the data of both our thinking and feeling brains. And now we can respond instead of react.
Of all the neuroscience, psychology I've learned about, nobody has ever done the amygdala in
Really?
the Yes! How is that
Wow.
possible?
Wow.
I
There's,
love that.
yeah.
I love that because 'cause they're always
And
like, "Oh,
it's,
the reptilian brain in the back of your head's about here." I'm like, "Where? Where back there?
right.
I can't see inside your head.
Yeah.
Where? Where is it?"
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the
Yeah.
thumb in the fist,
Yeah.
but then it gets
Yeah.
hijacked. It's like a beast coming out, and it's like, "Roar," and then
Yeah.
yeah,
It's that fight, flight, or freeze,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's what our emotions do to us.
Okay.
And so, and we have multiple emotions that can happen, right? We might not just feel one thing, so that that can play a role in how long that lasts. But scientifically, it's 6 seconds that it takes for that chemical reaction to cycle. So if you can pause for 6 seconds and either take a deep breath, or I was taught by one of my mentors in one of my first trainings was, name 6 of the 7 dwarves, or name 6 of your favorite foods, or 6 places you want to travel. Like, find a little game you can play with yourself to take that pause, and then name that feeling and figure out what's going on. Make a more intentional choice to respond.
That is so interesting, and you were saying that we're emotional humans, we feel things, who think
Emotional creatures that
creatures
think.
that think. It's so interesting you said that because then what came to mind is whether you name the feeling or not, it's still there. So
Yeah,
I'm even thinking, I don't know why, like my corporate life came up for me in that moment where it's definitely a place where you are I mean, there's the unlearning of like don't cry, whatever when you're younger, but we didn't all grow up that way. Like I have 3 sisters. We were all crying all the time. Like that was fine. But it was when I got to the corporate world where I was
right.
totally myself. And then I started to learn these funny little habits of like really stifling the feeling,
Yeah,
being professional.
yeah,
Of course, there's a time and a place. You don't wanna be a robot, but you don't wanna be some hot mess, but yeah, that it was just that was really prevalent, I noticed, but
yeah.
regardless if you're staying in that thinking spot, the feelings are still there, and so you're gonna
Mhm.
have these then you see the person who goes, like, lashes out at work. I've seen a couple lash out moments where I've been like, "What the actual fuck?" Like,
Right.
"What is going on?" But I can only imagine the pent up, like, pop can that's just exploding
Absolutely.
because they're not naming their feelings,
Yes.
Joanna.
Yes.
They
Yes,
haven't
and I
worked with
can't
you.
remember what the phrase or what the term is for that, but there is, when you bottle that up,
Yeah.
it will get to the point where it's like a shaken up pop can. It's gonna explode.
Yes.
So,
Wow, absolutely incredible. I love this. This is such an honest and approachable way to explore this topic because I know there's a lot of layers to this. This is like, intro, but I think that this is an important part of it. Like there's so many more layers we could go into, but this feels like really very approachable and something we can take away tonight and
yeah,
today. Whether you're in
that's
the
what I
workplace
hope.
as a leader, as a parent, this is
Absolutely.
this is incredible. Now, I want to go back to your story
Mhm.
because there's other layers of your story that we're kind of weaving into this journey through emotional intelligence. And it sounds like maybe there was a part of your journey where you recognized how you were feeling in your marriage. Are you,
Mm.
to the level of comfort? I know you said you're an open book.
Yeah.
What was that feeling that you started to feel?
I felt completely disconnected from myself. I felt lost. I didn't know, what was my purpose. And I think a lot of it came from that suppression of feelings, because every time I tried to express my feelings, it was not a safe place. And so, exactly what you said, like in the workplace, it's often not safe. And so people suppress and suppress. And what happens is, yeah, you either bottle it up and lose it,
Mhm.
um, or you just slowly become empty and lose yourself. And it took it took a lot of sort of work on my physical healing journey, but also an emotional healing journey of really reconnecting to who I was and what I knew to be true about myself and what I loved about myself and finding that again. And through my coaching training, I did a lot of work in uncovering that and refinding my voice, reclaiming my voice, finding out, what I love and who I am again and my purpose. And now, through coaching, I love when I get to support other people and sort of finding that place within themselves again.
Beautiful. And so there came a point where you realized it was just the situation you were in was no longer in alignment with your true self and who you wanted to be and express in this world?
Yeah. Yeah. I realized for myself that I was allowing things and that I didn't want to model that for my children any longer. I was allowing things that were making myself be disrespected, that were crossing my boundaries, that were not healthy for me emotionally. And I didn't want my children to see me as weak. I didn't want my children to see me as saying one thing and doing another,
Mm.
not being in alignment. And so I got to a place where I had to make that choice. And it was, obviously a sad choice. There's a lot of grief that comes with that letting go, but it was a powerful choice in that I chose me and I recognized my value and my worth, and I'm much happier. And I feel proud of the example that I could set and try to continue setting, for my kids as well.
Yeah, congratulations. That's such a powerful story. And I can only imagine how proud they are of you. Remind me how old your kids are now.
Yeah, so my daughter's 21 and my son is 16.
Oh, and how
So
have they expressed, if they have at this point, I'm sure if not, it will come, but how have they expressed this experience and seeing you transform in this way? Like, there's grieving, I can only imagine on their end, but are they
mhm.
proud and excited for you for choosing yourself? Are they there yet?
Yeah, my daughter has definitely shared that
Good.
she's proud of me and that always remember that, mom, your value, your worth. And she's taught me a lot of that too, just watching her be so strong in who she is and not settling and knowing, her boundaries and her value. And so she's expressed that. My son is also, obviously we've talked about the grief and there is grief for all of us, but he's also said, I'd rather have two happy parents than miserable ones. And so he sees and he knows that I'm happy and he's proud of me for that. And yeah, I think that for anyone, struggling on that journey and feeling stuck or feeling like I don't have a choice, you do. You do have a choice. And for a long time, I felt like I didn't have a choice and I felt like I wanted to hold it all together for my family. But getting to the place of me not being anything, how could I be an example to them in that capacity? And so making that choice was the right choice. And now, being able to parent from a full place and a place of confidence and worth and value. Yeah.
Incredible. That's such a beautiful story. And I have to ask, what were those signs and symptoms for you? How does one even tap in to recognize like, whoa, I've kind of lost myself. Like
Mm,
I find it hard to just, I wonder if there's people who are listening who are like, how do I know if I'm there, if I'm at that
mm,
place? And I know this
yeah.
is this is just from your personal experience too.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
would just be from my personal
Yeah.
experience, but great question because I don't know that I've even kind of looked back and reflected on like what that was for me. I think I became very numb And
Mm.
I realized that when we were in all of these social situations, I was putting on this mask of having the perfect family and being really happy. And I would go home and feel so sad and so alone and so empty. And so that there was no alignment between within my home and what the outer world was seeing. And to recognize that, I mean, that was really hard to admit. It was really hard to accept and admit. And I think for a long time I wanted to pretend like, yeah, everything is fine. Everything is fine. People go through hard times and you can get through it. And there were hard times that we got through. We were together for 21 years and there were hard times that we got through. And but when you get to a place where you can't speak, you can't set boundaries, or they're not respected, um, you feel like you have to hide your feelings. You feel like you're walking on eggshells, and your inner world at home does not match what you're showing the outer world. I think that would be the indicator that I would say maybe just dig a little deeper within and
Yeah. It's not to
yeah.
say this isn't like if you are feeling this, you need to leave your partner. It's just saying
No,
there's
no,
something there. There's
there's
something to
something there.
explore.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you so much for sharing that and your just, your inner workings of what was happening because I think so often we hear these stories and you're like, "Okay, yeah, that's inspiring." But then and then you kind of feel connected to it in some way, but you never really know like what did they really mean by that? Sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
wish the host would have asked that question like what was happening? Like what does that look like even?" Or it's like you hear like a word like jargon and you're like, "I don't know what that acronym is."
Right, right.
So thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
sharing that, and that's, I mean, even just seeing your face, telling the story, going from, like, being that, you know, numb, disconnected person who was living in 2 different worlds to then when you talk about your kids now and the work that you do now and just even watching you as you work through that process that you work through my kitchen example, like, you're so grounded, you're so good at what you do.
thank you.
And I have to ask
Thanks.
also it's one thing to recapture your purpose and who you are and your sense of self-love and self-worth, how did you then layer on the voice? Because it's one thing to internally feel it all, but how do you layer in, okay, now I'm finding my voice in this world again. Like I
Mm,
now feel comfortable to speak when I didn't feel comfortable to speak before.
right. Oh, still learning that one.
Yeah.
But it was having a mentor coach that really supported that, continuing the self-awareness exploration, right? I think we can always be learning and growing, and there's times to, maybe take a pause and just integrate what you've identified, but continuing that exploration to really, okay, now I know what I stand for. How am I integrating that into my life? How am I showing up and doing that? And so it is things like speaking up when I see something that I don't agree with and having the courage to do that. And it is sometimes choosing not to speak, maybe leading by example. And so, that might be just somebody listens to this podcast, or it might be that somebody sees how I interact with people in a networking event. It doesn't always have to be loud and announcing. It can be done in different ways, but knowing within your heart who you are and what you stand for, what your values are, and connecting everything that you do to those values, I think is what grounds me and sort of brings me into that presence and confidence in using my voice.
That's so beautiful. Oh, thank you.
Thank
There's
you.
so much more we could do. We're running short on time. I've got questions about leaders and leadership, but we will save that for another day. I have to ask you, Joanna, what's something that you're still trying to figure out?
Well, I just mentioned, that finding my voice and where to use it. I think I'm still trying to figure that out. Imposter syndrome, I think, plays a role in everybody's life at some point. And so there are moments where I think, who am I to be doing this? And who am I to, share expertise on this? And especially as a coach, right? I think that kind of pops up because as a coach, we aren't an expert. We aren't somebody who has the answers. We are just someone who facilitates the conversation to allow somebody to access their own wisdom and answers. And so I do find that imposter syndrome creep in at times when maybe I want to, you know, be more out there speaking, or I want to lead more workshops. So that would be a piece that I would say I'm still figuring out.
Well, I should just let you just feel what you feel, but I also want to say, and I hope you don't stop sharing and that you don't stop speaking, you don't stop coming on podcasts, speaking on panels, doing your workshops, because yes, there's a time and a place for coaching, but there's also a time and a place for teaching and sharing from
Right.
your experience and all that you've learned. You've taken a ton of courses and you've studied. And so, if not you, then who? Like, who else could teach? You speak from a place where you understand. I can share the example of wanting to be with my kids, being irritable in the kitchen. And you're like, yes, I see you. I have been you. And
Yeah.
that's not coaching, but there's still a time and a place for that. You don't have to be Joanna the coach all the time. You can be
Right.
Joanna the wise sage.
Yes. Love
And
it.
where can everybody find you? I know you have beautiful, you have a website and you share on social media. So where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so my website is actually going to be redone over the summer. I'm super excited.
Oh,
So you can
congrats.
still check it out, but it will be redone. So hearttalks.ca. And then on Instagram, you can find me at hearttalks_ with Joanna Brewster.
Nice. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Um, and your wisdom and just a bit about emotional intelligence, but really how we can weave it into our lives as parents, as leaders at work, and just making it accessible. Like it didn't have to be this like course that we took. Like just
right.
what is it? How do we name the feelings? How do we then, oh no, now I'm forgetting now. Feelings into the what was the second piece?
Well, feelings, thoughts, and actions.
Thoughts and actions.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
and then the actions.
TFA,
Okay.
TFA, the thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Thoughts, feelings,
Yeah.
and actions. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.